The year is 1174. Work starts on Wells Cathedral. On the 6th of July, 1189, Henry II dies. He is succeeded by his son Richard I. Richard I joins the Third Crusade. The Crusades were a series of 9 religious wars waged from 1095 to liberate Jerusalem and the Holy Land from Islamic rule. Richard raised taxes, sold assets, and emptied the treasury to raise funds for his army. In 1199, Richard I dies. He is succeeded by his brother John. In 1209, a group of scholars migrated from the established centre of learning at Oxford to Cambridge. Here they set up a new university, and so the University of Cambridge came to be established. On the 15th of June 1215, the Magna Carta is signed by King John and his barons at Runnymede on the River Thames. On the 28th of October in 1216, Henry III is crowned King of England. In the heart of a lively medieval village in 1220, workers hustle and sweat beneath the blazing sun. Towering wooden scaffolding frames the bustling construction of a grand cathedral, its stone walls rising toward the sky. Salisbury Cathedral starts to take shape. Under the gaze of King Henry III, the grand transformation of Westminster Abbey begins. The old Romanesque structure, built by Edward the Confessor in the 1040s, stands as workers dismantle parts of it, preparing for a bold new Gothic vision. Wooden scaffolding surrounds the site, and the air is filled with the clang of chisels and hammers shaping stone for the towering arches and intricate ribbed vaults. The king, clad in regal attire, watches closely, ensuring the central shrine dedicated to Edward the Confessor takes precedence. Architects and clergy consult detailed plans, envisioning the soaring spires and stained glass that will soon adorn the abbey, reflecting the divine majesty of the realm. On the 20th of November in 1272, Henry III dies and is succeeded by his son Edward. He was crowned Edward I in August of 1274. Edward I conquers Wales. Llywelyn ap Gruffydd, the country's last prince, is killed. In the July of 1290, Edward I expels all the Jews from England. In 1296, during the Wars of Scottish Independence, Edward I of England, known as Longshanks, launched a brutal invasion of Scotland, seeking to assert dominance over the rebellious Northern Kingdom. Edward's forces stormed north after the Scots broke their fealty to him, launching attacks and razing towns as they marched. One of the most significant acts of the campaign was Edward's capture of the ancient city of Scone, the symbolic heart of Scottish kingship. At Scone Abbey, Edward seized the Stone of Destiny, or Stone of Scone, a sacred object used in the coronation ceremonies of Scottish kings for centuries. This stone symbolised Scottish sovereignty, and by taking it, Edward aimed to break the spirit of Scottish resistance. He had the stone transported to Westminster Abbey in London, where he had a special throne, the coronation chair built to house it. From then on, it became a key part of the English coronation ritual, with English kings symbolically asserting their dominance over Scotland by sitting atop the stone during their crowning. In the September of 1297, in a stunning display of strategy and fierce determination, the Scots, led by the fiery William Wallace, achieve a momentous victory over the English at Stirling Bridge. Against formidable odds, Wallace and his warriors outmaneuver the English forces, using the narrow bridge to their advantage, trapping and overwhelming the enemy. The clash echoes across the river as Scottish blades clash against English armour, marking a pivotal triumph in Scotland's struggle for independence and a legendary moment in Wallace's rise as a national hero. 12 July, the Battle of Falkirk. In a brutal clash of might and strategy, King Edward I leads his English forces to a decisive victory over William Wallace and the Scots at the Battle of Falkirk. With fierce resolve, Edward's well-trained knights and archers break through Wallace's formidable shield wall, unleashing a hail of deadly arrows that devastate the Scottish ranks. The battlefield is soon engulfed in chaos as the once proud Scottish resistance falters. Though Wallace and his men fight valiantly, they are ultimately forced to retreat, marking a sobering blow to Scotland's fight for freedom and a reminder of Edward's relentless ambition. Edward I makes his eldest son, also Edward, Prince of Wales, a title the eldest son of the English monarch continues to take to this day. William Wallace's execution on August 23, 1305, was notoriously brutal and intended to be a stark warning to those who opposed English rule. Captured by the English and convicted of treason, Wallace was subjected to one of the most harrowing executions of the time: hanging, drawing, and quartering. Robert Bruce is crowned King of the Scots in 1306. On July 7th, 1307, Edward I, known as Hammer of the Scots, dies while campaigning in the north, leaving the English throne to his son, Edward II. Inheriting a legacy of military conquest and formidable authority, Edward II's reign would prove to be marked by a starkly different character than his father's. 2 years after ascending the throne, in 1308, Edward II strengthened diplomatic ties with France by marrying Isabella, the young and politically astute daughter of King Philip IV of France. Known as the She-Wolf of France. In June 1314, the Scots, led by Robert the Bruce, achieved a decisive and legendary victory over the English at the Battle of Bannockburn. Facing a much larger English force under King Edward II, Bruce's army used both strategic ingenuity and the landscape to their advantage. The Scots positioned themselves on marshy ground near Bannockburn, making it difficult for the English heavy cavalry to manoeuvre effectively. Between 1315 and 1322, Europe endured the devastating Great Famine, a period of mass starvation and suffering that claimed millions of lives. The crisis was triggered by a series of colder, wetter years that ruined crops across the continent. Relentless rains rotted fields, and floodwaters swept away entire harvests, leaving communities without food reserves. The medieval technology and infrastructure were woefully inadequate for drying, storing, or transporting grain under such conditions, compounding the crisis. Starvation set in swiftly, and once flourishing regions were ravaged by malnutrition, disease, and social collapse. Livestock perished in droves, fields lay fallow, and desperation drove many to extremes, with reports of theft, violence, and even instances of cannibalism emerging in the historical record. In September, Isabella invades England and overthrows Edward II. Edward II's wife, Isabella, had left England for France in 1325 on the pretext of helping to settle a dispute over territory. But she had been badly treated by Edward's favourites, the Despensers, and declined to return. Instead, she remained in Paris, where she found a lover, Roger Mortimer. In 1326, she returned to England with a large force, whereupon the king's supporters deserted him. Edward was captured, as were the Despensers who were executed in the autumn of the same year. On the 20th of January, Edward II is murdered, and Edward III becomes king. Edward II abdicated in favour of his son. He was later murdered at Berkeley Castle in Gloucestershire on the orders of Isabella and her lover, Roger Mortimer. Isabella and her lover Mortimer ruled while her son Edward III was in his minority, too young. the 100 Years' War begins. It is the name historians have given to a series of related conflicts fought over the course of more than a century between France and England. In 1348, the Black Death, a highly contagious and deadly strain of bubonic plague, reached England, ushering in one of the darkest chapters in medieval history. Likely arriving via merchant ships from continental Europe, the plague spread with terrifying speed, infecting city streets, villages, and rural communities alike. Caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, the disease led to agonizing symptoms: high fever, chills, swelling of lymph nodes, and severe pain. Death often followed within days of infection. Edward III dies and is succeeded by Richard II. Edward the Black Prince had died in 1376, so the succession passed to Edward's grandson, Richard II, who was just 10 years old. At the beginning of his reign, due to his age, the country was ruled by his uncle, John of Gaunt, whose son Henry Bolingbroke eventually murdered Richard and became king as Henry IV. Shortly after the Black Death, agricultural workers were in high demand, but the landlords were reluctant to pay higher wages. Coupled with heavy taxation and an unpopular government, it caused an uprising. The rebels converged on London. They stormed the Tower of London and prominent individuals were executed. When the rebel leader Wat Tyler was killed, Richard II successfully diffused the situation by promising concessions. But instead, reprisals followed. On the 31st of August, Henry V dies suddenly, leaving his son Henry VI as king. He was less than a year old and now King of England and France under the terms of the Treaty of Troyes, 1420. To this day, he is still the youngest ever King of England. England was ruled by a regency council. In France, John Duke of Bedford, the king's uncle, gradually extended English control. In December 1431, Henry VI of England was crowned King of France. The War of the Roses begins with the First Battle of St. Albans. Henry VI's wife, Margaret, drove York out. York marched on London and defeated Henry's supporters, the Lancastrians, at St. Albans. This relatively small battle marks the beginning of a civil war between two branches of the royal family, York and Lancaster, that lasted intermittently until 1485. The Duke of York was the main figure on the Yorkist side, and Margaret, Henry's queen, took charge of the Lancastrian cause. The Lancastrians are defeated at Towton, and Edward IV, the Duke of York's son, is proclaimed king. Henry VI and Margaret flee to Scotland. In the June of 1461, Edward was crowned king. On the 30th of October 1470, Henry VI is briefly restored to the throne. On the 4th of May, 1471, Yorkists defeat the Lancastrians and kill Edward, Prince of Wales and heir of Henry VI. Henry VI survived for little more than a fortnight after the battle. He was murdered, most likely in the Tower of London, on the 21st of May, 1471. Edward IV was King of England again. On the 9th of April, Edward IV dies and is succeeded by his 12-year-old son, Edward V. Edward's uncle, his father's brother Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was named Protector. Gloucester met the new king on his journey to London, and when they reached the capital, lodged him in the Tower of London with his younger brother, also called Richard. In June, the boys were declared illegitimate. It was alleged that their father's marriage to their mother, Elizabeth Woodville, had been invalid. In the July of 1483, Richard III becomes king and the princes in the Tower disappear. Both his nephews, the 12-year-old Edward V and his brother Richard, were never seen alive again after this time. They had been imprisoned in the Tower of London and were presumed murdered. It is not clear who was responsible for this deed. If you have enjoyed this presentation, then please leave a like, a comment and subscribe to enjoy all that TheMunkterFiles has to offer.